From shamans to scientists, mediums to masterminds, cannabis to LSD. Spark joy, spark curiosity, and spark a joint. Because you're listening to Budding Mind. Budding Mind. Aloha, friends, and welcome to the Budding Mind podcast. Today's guest is Jason Pinsky. He's the Simon Cowell of concentrates, former chief cannabis evangelist for Eaze, and recipient of the first Cannabis Producer credit on iMDB. He's obviously a multi-faceted man. From coast to coast, he's been a powerful presence in the cannabis space for over a decade, and the intersection of his passion for weed and tech have made him a multimedia maven of marijuana. That's an alliteration for the heavens, people. He helped bring cannabis to the mainstream with Vice's Bong Appetit, and now he's the host of his very own podcast, Pinsky and The Brain. Here to expand your minds and alter your perceptions is Jason Pinsky.
The crowd goes wild.
Yeah, there you go. Cue the eruption of applause. Cue the horns.
There's a guy with cue cards over there, right off camera, right, holding it up. Applause, applause.
Yes, thank you. And now you can hold the applause, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's always a joy to be in your presence, especially when you're rocking that one hell of a powerful turtleneck.
I would say that some of the most interesting minds, right? There's like a well-known fact about people that wear the same thing every day. And so I've been known to wear a black hemp t-shirt. I've got like 30 of them in my closet. I'm actually wearing one underneath the turtleneck. Just to keep
Not to be confused, anyone. He's keeping up.
If you have seen me out ever, it's basically black t-shirt and jeans.
I am now thinking back, and that is positively correct.
Trust me, like you could check my closet, like it's actually like that. And some of the most interesting minds have like worn the same thing. It's supposed to have less brain cycles on like what you're wearing and more on like what you're doing.
Right, like kids that go to Catholic school, some of the most interesting.
I was thinking like Steve Jobs wore the same thing every day. Jerry Garcia wore the same thing every day. The woman from Theranos?
Yeah. I'm just going to keep coming up with the opposing viewpoints here. No, I totally dig that. I think that's a brilliant way to save some mental capacity, but I like to stress myself out for an absurd amount of time deciding what I'm going to wear.
Well, I'm in a new relationship, so like my wardrobe is expanding. Let me just say that. This was not like, my selection, but actually it looks really good. So,
it looks really good. Yeah. It looks very powerful.
A little bit distinguished.
Yeah. So this is a podcast on turtlenecks.
Okay.
And what's your, no, just kidding. So I want to start with this incredible philosophy and overarching kind of theme or symbol that you have stirred up for yourself, which is none other than the Pinsky triangle. So there's a twofold thing here, because the Pinsky triangle is something that you, quote unquote, invented, a la your interests.
Yeah.
But quite literally, it's a real geometric formula.
Well, it's actually called the Sierpinski triangle.
Okay, there we go. There we go. Thank you.
And it's
close enough for me.
Still. And I discovered this actually after I had come up with the narrative for the Pinsky triangle. So, it was basically me trying to figure out like what my core values were. I was in a quest to kind of like, get my next career move. And I had been working in business for quite some time. And, you'd worked gigs that you loved, and then you've worked gigs that like you hated but paid you really well. Or at least that was my history. And, I was about to turn 40, and I was kind of thinking to myself, what are my core values? Like, if I want to pick like what my next career move, I spent 20 years in music, and I spent 20 years in tech, and I had a side business in weed. And it was like, well, what am I going to do like now? Before I decided what I wanted to do, I wanted to identify like what was important to me. So the first Pinsky triangle was actually like my core values. And it was kind of like I wanted to beat to my own drum. Like I wanted to, actually I thought I was like, I need to be the boss, but really it was more like listen to my inner voice. And it was also, what have I done in my career that I've had passion for that really got me up out of bed every morning? And when I started to think about my passion and my inner voice and connected those two dots, I realized that my full-time job at the time needed to be me and my health. I was on OxyContin for 15 years. I had spine surgery. From 2000 to 2012, I was medicated, pharmaceutically medicated, like, prescription, doctor, pain clinics, like the whole thing. And, here I was 10 years in to an opiate addiction, and I was about to turn 40, and I'm like, shit, like, am I going to make it to 50? And I was the heaviest that I had ever been. I was on a massive dose of pain medication, and it was right before my 40th birthday that I was like, if I'm listening to my inner voice and I'm thinking about what I'm passionate about, like, how about life? Like, how about just living to 50 as like my new full-time job? So like, let me make my job losing 100 pounds and getting 100% off the opiates. And that was the beginning of kind of figuring out, like, the first triangle of core values. But when I thought about, what that manifested into as far as work, when you're working out and eating right, you can't like fill an entire day. So I spent the rest of the day learning about weed. It was 2012, right as Colorado and Washington were legalizing. And I started to like see the shift of this whole like medical marijuana movement into an adult use industry. And for me, as a computer scientist, I wanted to think about like, what is cannabis science about? And what is the chemistry about the plant? And what is the biology about the plant? And I went to YouTube and I started learning about the endocannabinoid system and cannabis chemistry. And I started following all these weird dudes who like,
probably weird dudes.
Totally. And actually it wasn't just dudes. It was like, there's a huge community of researchers from across the world. You can't learn this stuff in class. You have to really go toward like, YouTube actually was like the best source. Yeah. And I started to learn about how my situation being, in chronic pain could be alleviated or helped by cannabis, medicine, plant therapy, and really started to take my computer science background and shift it toward cannabis science. And that's when I knew that, kind of, not only would my full-time job be my health, but then kind of shifting the Pinsky triangle. It had been weed and music were really my passion points as far as my career. And tech is how I made my living. And at some point I added food into the mix. It became 4-point geometry.
Became a fractal.
It became a tetrahedron. But really what happened was, it kind of shifted on axis. And I knew that weed was going to be like the next chapter, but that it wouldn't necessarily be just trying to like grow weed or sell weed. It was really more about the communication and the messaging and like, the power of this plant and how it impacted me. And kind of like, my mission, for lack of a better word, to share my experience and kind of bestow that to humanity.
And you're doing a phenomenal job.
I'm doing a phenomenal job.
You are. Look at you right
now. Here it is.
Can't wait, baby. So I would love to learn a little bit more about the intersection of all of these points on the Pinsky triangle for you. So what is your background in tech, and how does that inform the way that you view cannabis and your approach and your relationship?
It's interesting. I was born at the right time. I'm a child of the 70s. I was born in 73.
Oh, lucky you.
I got like, two things happen at my bar mitzvah, right? I think it's every young Jew's rite of passage to go smoke weed at the parking lot of your bar mitzvah, right? Like that's like...
I didn't know where everyone would want to be Jewish.
No, but it's just like in many cultures, there's different things that make you a man, like in Africa, they'll like hang you from a tree,
right?
Or send you on a walkabout or like whatever. And in my world, it was like your older brother's like, come here, kid, and your bar mitzvah. So, but two things happened in my bar mitzvah. I discovered cannabis. The second thing is I got a computer. I got an Apple IIc from my grandma Sylvia and Papa Max. And I know, shout out to Grandma Sylvia, right?
Shout out, Granny.
Yeah. So, I started early in tech. It was just kind of like the thing at the right time. And over my career, when I was 21, I started a software company. Uh, I was very into the whole .com thing, going online. I had an ISP. We hosted people's websites and did email hosting. So that was kind of one lane. And then also I'm a child of a third generation Garmento, actually, from New York's Fashion Center. So my dad made belts and handbags. My grandfather made watch straps. So I kind of took my tech background and applied it to my dad's family business. And we started a software company in '94 that catered to the fashion industry for about 6 or 7 years before we sold it.
And you were likely creating something that didn't really exist.
Well, yeah,
there was a huge need for it at that time.
Digital photography didn't exist. First digital camera came out in '94, and we were like pioneers of that. So we would go into showrooms, to clothing companies, and some small ones, but then also like Calvin Klein and Nicole Miller and Hugo Boss and Escada. And we were the first digital photographers for New York Fashion Week. You know what I mean? And we were bringing digital photography into fashion and then building software that allowed companies to build custom catalogs and line sheets for buyers. So it really, if you think about the tech revolution that was happening, most of it was in Silicon Valley. Most of it was happening on the West Coast. And we were like the sweethearts of Silicon Alley in New York City.
Oh, God, I love that.
Yeah.
And so then you eventually made your way using your technological savvy to go on tour. I mean, you have
music was really, like I said, was one of the passion points of the Pinsky Triangle. I played piano when I was 6 and drums.
Oh.
So I had a background in performance, and then over time I got into the production side of it. So before I did TV production, I was a music producer. I was recording live shows, and by day I would have my software company, and then at night I would go out to gigs in New York City, and I'd go out with a quarter ounce of sour diesel and a digital recorder, and that was your all access credentials that you needed to pretty much get anywhere and record some shows. And that was how I made my career, was recording live music in New York City.
God, that is so cool. And so who were some of anyone noteworthy that you worked with?
Well, I mean, I was on tour with Fish. I was their IT director. I was the tech director for the Bonnaroo Music Festival.
Oh my goddess.
I went to Woodstock in '99 and did George Clinton. I was working for a company called Liquid Audio, and Liquid Audio was before iTunes. They were one of the first like digital rights management capable music services, and I would do like the live recordings for them on the East Coast. So, I've had a dangerous career in music, I should say, and have worked with a lot of artists, and, bands would come into the city and we were the plug. Like, we were the guys that had the sour diesel, and we were the guys that had the Chem 91 in New York City. So you can imagine, hey, the Allman Brothers are playing the Beacon Theater, Pinsky, come on up with some weed. You know what I'm saying? Like, I got a lot of phone calls.
Great way to be able to exist in these communities and spaces.
Well, yeah. I mean, it wasn't about quantity. It was about quality, and it was about access. And there was a limited amount of really good head stash. And it was like, how am I adding value to your life? And how are you adding value to my life in terms of choosing who was able to get it?
Were you a dealer?
Yeah.
Oh, you were?
Oh, yeah. Like I sold weed. Let me be clear on that. Like my first cannabis cup was in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
So I was 21 years old. And when I went out to Amsterdam and I saw like, what a tolerated, I guess, marketplace looked like, and came back to New York, and I was like, damn, dude, like this is my calling. But it was 94. So like it was way too early to be public about any of that. So I was like, let me make my career in tech, and that's how I'll make my living. But music and weed were the passion points of the Pinsky Triangle.
Wow.
So, I would come home from work, and I'd have like my office, and it would be very, private. Dudes would come over. You'd have to be a friend, and we'd sit and listen to music and hang out, and you'd leave with a quarter ounce of weed, and that was it. It wasn't really like I was set up to be a weed dealer. But I had extra weed and I sold it to my friends. And, you know, it was really, I think, a key point in establishing a really diverse network of friends and family over the last 30 years.
And so you were a connoisseur of your own making when it comes to cannabis, but did you ever feel beyond like the love for consuming it and sharing it with people, did you foresee the timeline of states legalizing cannabis and you participating
No,
in
it
that?
wasn't. It wasn't until, well, first of all, I thought medical marijuana was a joke.
What do you mean?
I didn't even know, like, you know, in New York, it was like, oh, yeah, cool, man. You can go to Venice and you get a card on the beach and anyone could get a prescription for weed out in California. And I had no idea, actually, until I found myself 10 years into an opiate addiction. And then I started hearing stories of people that were using cannabis for a host of different ailments. And chronic pain was definitely one of them. So as I started to do the research, and I was like, damn, like, we have an endocannabinoid system and we have these receptors and these are compounds in the plant. And I think it was really like the analytics. Before I got into the biology, I was into the chemistry. And I looked at like, there was a place called Analytical 360 in Seattle.
Sounds very inviting.
And well, actually, it was super cool because their website, they would take their tests that they would do on weed and publish them. And they had a searchable database of all the different tests that they would do. And I would be able to be like, oh, here's some different stuff. So here I am making hash in New York and going out to my first MJ BizCon, which was in 2013 in Seattle. This is before Vegas. And I called up the guys at Analytical 360 and I was like, yo, can I come by? And like, I'm from New York. It's like, this is so cool. And they were super cool. They let me in. I put a lab coat on me and took my took my BHO and tested it. And I was like probably the first guy in New York that had made, you know.
Wait, what's your BHO?
Cannabis extract, a butane hash oil.
Oh, got it.
Right.
Okay.
So back then we were extracting with butane.
Uh-huh.
And I took my shatter was the consistency that it probably came out and had it tested. And, really was like, oh, this is like THC percentage was one thing. But for me, I was like, wait, you're making these products with butane. How do you know that the butane is gone?
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about residual solvent testing and how you could look at like how much of it is still left in there. And from that point, I was like, okay, I understand that, you've got this plant and it produces this oil, and inside this oil, it's got a myriad of all these chemical compounds. And then I started learning that the same compounds that were in the plant exist endogenously and are created, by our bodies. And from that point, it was like, ooh, mind blown. So like, then I started to really shift my perspective on like, wow, this medical thing is real and maybe it can help me get off opiates. And it took me about 1.5 years to get 100% off the pain meds. I lost about 80 pounds. That was my goal in 2013, was to lose 100 pounds and to get 100% off the pain meds. And by October 10th, 2014, I was opiate free. I had lost the weight and really wanted to kind of use my story and my experience to share. And the New York legislation was just being written around then. So I was fortunate to go up to Albany and testify in front of the, closed Senate hearings on my story as like a successful businessman. Well, successful, debatable. But I was able to share my story of like, getting off opiates with the New York State. And through that, it helped to get chronic pain listed as a qualifying condition.
Wow.
And the original legislation didn't even have chronic pain or opiates in the legislation, but through my testimony and through what was happening, I guess, through a lot of combined efforts and not just my own.
Of course, but
we were able to really open up patient access to a huge population in New York. So yeah, that was kind of
emotional. I think I'm gonna cry thinking about that. How many pivotal moments in cannabis history are just like constantly stacking up moment by moment right now at this time.
Yeah.
Or, when you were testifying. on behalf of this beloved plant. But can you tell me about, like, what did you share with the state Senate about?
Mostly about, at that time, it was in vogue. The Charlotte's Web was really a big thing. And there were a lot of states that were trying to get on this CBD bandwagon. And there was a lot of lobbying going on from companies that were trying to get into the CBD space, that were putting a lot of money into lobbyists that would try to craft legislation that would suit their business. So my testimony was kind of against CBD only legislation. There was legislation that was being proposed that would make CBD only legal, and didn't really talk about like the combination of CBD with THC and with terpenes and the entourage effect and whatnot. So I was basically like a proponent of whole plant medicine more than just a one isolated, particular compound.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. And your journey of weaning yourself off of opiates and onto cannabis. I mean, you were consuming cannabis that whole time.
Well,
yeah, my assumption.
Here's the thing.
You were smoking since your bar
weed.
mitzvah.
I was smoking weed my whole life. And for the 14 years that I was a slave to opiates, I was smoking weed. It wasn't until the last 2 years when I got back with High Times in 2014, and I started judging cannabis cups again. And through that experience, I started to get access to concentrates.
Like high quality.
Well, and high concentration. Delivery and dosing is everything. If you have a headache and you took a Tylenol, and and it's like, take 2 Tylenol, but you're like, yeah, I'm just going to take a quarter of the Tylenol. I'm just going to try to rub it on my skin. I'll see what happens. Well, that's the wrong dose and it's the wrong delivery. So with weed, it was the same thing. Like, smoking cannabis flower has an effect, but it doesn't have the same therapeutic effect as consuming concentrates, whether you're dabbing them or, which is what we were doing a lot as we were judges. But then also, as I started to get more dialed into the cannabis chemistry community, there were capsules, there were tinctures, there were all sorts of different formulations that were presenting weed more in something that you ate, and something that you would consider food as a nutrient. And that's when it really started to have a therapeutic effect, was because I had changed my delivery and dosing. And I had access to all these different formulations as a judge for High Times before it was legal in New York. Kind of crazy silver lining.
Do you remember the day that you took your last, was it OxyContin?
It was OxyContin. It was October 10th, 2014. I remember specifically because Robert Plant from Led Zeppelin was playing Brooklyn Bowl on the 9th. And I remember being at the bowl on the 9th, and I was like this far away from Robert Plant. And it was like the last, I came home that night, and it's not easy to wean off opiates. You actually have to like create your own tapering schedule, and you have to take your tablets and you have to quarter them, or sometimes like, cut them into like, eighth chunks. What you really want to do, and for anyone who might be listening who wants to get themselves off opiates, assume you're taking, like I was taking OxyContin, 80 milligram tablets. If you take 3 a day, that's 240 milligrams in 24 hours. So instead of taking 3 80 milligram tablets every 8 hours, if you take 10 milligram chunks every hour, you're still getting the same 240 milligrams over 24 hours, but you're taking it way more frequently. And then what you can do is, instead of taking every hour, you do that until then you just kind of
pull one out.
Well, you extend the time. So you extend the interval to like an hour and 15 minutes. And then you take 10 milligrams and you do that for a couple of days. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to have your body not be able to feel the difference. Because if you take too much, too little, then you'll go through like withdrawal symptoms.
Wow.
So the key is to increase the time interval. But think about it. When you go from every hour, it's 240 milligrams. Once you get to every 2 hours, now you're down to 120 milligrams. So keep in mind that, like, it's called a timed taper. And And eventually you're able to just wean yourself off. But like, we're talking, in my case, it took like a year. I was at a lot more than 240 milligrams. I was more like 2000 milligrams.
Wow.
You become tolerant to this over time. So you need more.
So your doctor writes you a upgraded
My doctor
script.
would keep writing me, an increased prescription, and over time, as it was, becoming less effective at the same dose.
And did you seek support from your doctor to do that time taper, or was that just self-driven?
Eventually, my doctor saw that I was making progress and started to write me lower dose pills, so I wouldn't have to necessarily do it myself. But still, even a 10 milligram tablet, can be cut. So by the end, I was taking like 2.5 milligram slices just to have, and probably it was in my brain. Like maybe at that point I didn't even need it. But eventually I was able to get off of it. And then what happens then is your body, man, it took this was October. I remember that winter feeling so cold all the time. My cells and my body was accustomed to this. You become not only mentally addicted, but also physically dependent. So it took almost 6 months for my body chemistry to kind of return back to normal, and then, it's been 8 years, this past October, that I've been opiate free.
Feeling great, looking great.
It's crazy. I'm on I guess every 10 years, I go through this thing. So when I was about to turn 40, I was like, I want to get 100% off the opiates and 100 pounds lost. This time I'm about to turn 50 next July. It's almost about the same time. So I'm on a 50 by 50 challenge to lose 50 pounds by the time I turn 50 in July. So that's kind of my goal.
And smoke 50 spliffs a day.
Well, I mean,
come on, we gotta round out the system.
50 by 50 by
50 by 50 by 50. I feel like hearing you speak even just about the tapered timeline and so much of what you share, you have clearly such a vested interest in the science and the technicality and the literal. And when that is combined with cannabis, I'm wondering what are you most stoked about? What do you like to nerd out about the most when it comes to weed? The
terpenes.
Yeah?
Yeah, fragrance. I'm very well known for, because in the whole chemistry game and, being focused on extraction, and then it was it wasn't just extractions, it was fractions. It's how do you take this oil and fraction it off into all these individual compounds. And the fragrance side of the business is actually in my next act. You'll probably see me, if I can bring a cannabis fragrance line to market that wasn't designed to be consumed. I feel like the world is ready to smell like weed.
I've been making candles, and I want to make weed scented candles so bad, but not cheesy scented weed, beautiful, organic, natural smells.
Yeah.
I do want to smell like weed.
Yeah. The plant is kind of I refer to the terpene story as pine trees have pinene, lemons and limes have limonene, but the cannabis plant is like the New York Public Library of terps. It's so diverse. It could express itself in so many different ways. And, rather than try to make formulations ourselves, because that's what they do in fragrance. They have these guys, they're called the nose, right? So for me, I refer to myself as the schnoz. You know what I'm saying? You could be the nose. I'm the schnoz. Imagine this cartoon character that's just a big nose wearing my glasses with a stick figure, kind of like the California Raisins being hey, come here, let me smell your weed.
I'm there. I love the show.
It's super creepy. But that's the thing is I would, and especially when we did Bong Appetit and we had the pantry and we had such an expression of different formulations and fractions, I would take the terps and I'd wear them and I'd be come here, you know what I mean?
Come here, get the schnoz on my terps. I think probably something that a lot of people don't know, and I remember hearing about this, my mind just that the terpenes, the aromas that are found in the cannabis plant that give it its delightful smells and flavors, those same compounds are used in the creation of fragrances, like the perfumes, the things that like when you walk into a Macy's and your olfactory system is just like overwhelmed with smells. The root of these sciences is the same. It's just now a lot of perfumes are falsely or chemically engineering these terpenes that are found in a natural state in the cannabis
that's
plant.
the thing that hasn't happened yet is people are trying to mimic the smell of weed. And there's a bunch of fragrance companies that have like, done like, scent of cannabis or
That's
ode
what
to
I mean,
cannabis.
like the cheesy smells.
It's bullshit. You know what I mean? So what I want to do is I want to be like, yo, that's sour diesel or that's Chem 91 or these are like, these different fragrances that Mother Nature is actually the best schnoz, right? Way better than me and way better than some French guy in a lab. You know what I mean? Like Mother Nature is the one that puts these things together. And really at the end of the day, I think being able to have the plant express itself, capture that. And then we, right, are the wild card, right? What smells right to me smells different to you. So like having the ability to, kind of find your terp profile and then develop a products that speak to that. Yeah, Oreos are doing that now with the custom Oreo cookies.
I didn't think you would. I did not know Oreo would be getting a free ad here.
So
you're welcome, Nabisco.
We're following in the footsteps of Oreos.
What do you mean they're doing custom flavors?
Yeah, you can get like a custom ID, like Oreo cookies now that are like custom suited to you. I think it's more photography, like like a picture. Imagine like a Brook Oreo cookie.
It would be gluten-free and vegan. They're already vegan though, so I don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I think that's a beautiful endeavor, and I'd be very excited for that. And more on the terpene conversation, a lot of advice that we're heard as consumers when you go into a dispensary, smell the cannabis because the nose knows. Like, is that you buy into this theory?
Yeah, big time. And that's the thing that makes cannabis retail so challenging is it's hard to do that. In
a post-COVID era as well.
Just like in general, you can't just smell the weed. So, that's kind of why I've, shifted from, buying and selling weed back in the day in New York to creating cannabis content, right? Because content, media, messaging, branding, these are elements that establish trust, So like if you know already that something is really good or you see, some sort of presentation or you see someone that that's like, this is amazing. That's what we tried to do on Bong Appetit is we tried to capture this aha moment where like the chefs would open the pantry and they'd be like, whoa. And they'd like, their discovery experience is really what translated, to the viewer. So being able to, and that's basically what it is. Like, like you don't trust necessarily everything you see on TV, but you trust your friends or you trust people that so, or people that you relate to. So being able to, convey that through some sort of content where it is somewhat of the only option, considering the fact that you can't walk into a store or you can't walk onto a delivery website and be like, oh, that smells right to me.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. But how do you, as a content creator and as a voice in the space, what are you trying to represent and to educate people on? And how do you stay authentic in your messaging and not just become like a brand machine? Like, buy this. This is good. This is good.
I think that, what we did on Bong Appetit was we were a food show and we connected globally with everyone that eats. So that's everyone. And, the weed was kind of like a subtext. So like, it wasn't, I agree with you, like being in your face about these things is not necessarily, the right messaging. And, for me, it depends what story that you're trying to tell. I connected to the weed as food story personally because I had a life-saving experience and created, a content that focused on cannabis and food together, and then learning about weed as a nutrient. The messaging I'm trying to convey right now is less about weed as a reactive intoxicant, but more as a proactive nutrient. I know.
Get that on a shirt.
It's sick, right?
Get that on a black hemp t-shirt.
That's the
I'll wear it every day.
That's kind of the next chapter. If you think about the evolution of the cannabis story, right? It started, well, at least in my lifetime, it started with counterculture. It moved into like a medical movement. The medical movement turned into an adult use, an industry. That industry over time, if you think of the story right now, it's very much about the industry becoming more equitable. The social impact and social issues are kind of like the narrative right now as it relates to the industry. Unfortunately, what got lost is the medical story. Like, hey, man, so I think it's important to be able to create content that kind of rewrites the narrative on cannabis as an essential nutrient. And without necessarily the intention of it even being used to get you high. I mean, like, weed getting you high is part of the reward system. It's like Mother Nature's way of being like, hey, do that again. You need that. Yeah. It's kind of like quenching your thirst when you drink water and you're like, ah. Or it's kind of like, certain other things that are necessary to humanity. Like what else is like a reward, feels good and is a reward system that's like necessary for like reproduction. You know what I'm saying? Like when things feel good, it's like the body and nature's way of being like, this is something that's essential. So the high that comes off of weed is kind of like the reward system. But it just so happens that in the last century, we've been breeding the plant for that high. And now, over the last decade, we've been breeding the plant for, the whole hemp CBD movement. There's plenty of varieties of weed that don't have any THC in them. So that's kind of the story that I think is important to tell. And then doing that in a way that's not like textbook scientific. How do you like explain, our body's chemistry and the plant's chemistry and the whole concept of chemical balance and homeostasis in a inviting way? So that's some of the things that keep me up at night.
And we want you getting your beauty rest, okay?
Well,
dialing it back just a bit to well, first of all, of course, I couldn't agree more. And what was playing in my head while you were speaking was the idea of the timeline of cannabis went from before we demonized it, from friend and then to enemy. And now we're in the phase of remedy.
Yeah.
And she belongs in the medicine cabinet. And I believe that perspective is the only thing that's really going to push forward legalization or decriminalization efforts to change people's the way that they look at this plant, that it is something that is like destroying the youth or whatever like archaic ideas that people still have about cannabis, I think can be dissuaded exclusively because of medicinal benefits. And with that, to me, is the idea that just because it's good for some people doesn't mean everyone has to do it. And I think that's what we're getting lost in the sauce with. And cannabis is this like idea that just because it's accessible, everyone needs to be smoking it all of the time. And it's like aspirin. Like you wouldn't take aspirin if you don't have a pain in your body. But I don't want to keep you from having access to aspirin.
Yeah. I think also, though, people take aspirin, like, again, think of proactive use of something and reactive use.
Okay. Yeah, totally.
So, like, my theory is that if we all used small doses of cannabis as a nutrient without the intention of even getting high, if it was just part of our food source in super low doses, but just enough to balance our endocannabinoids supplemented with phytocannabinoids from the plant. We have the same philosophy when it comes to things like water. Like we all know and we agree that we need 8 glasses of water to maintain optimal hydration. And what would happen if humanity was like deprived of water just for the last century? Like, you know, I'm kind of chronically dehydrated anyway. So like I can tell you what it's like, but like, you know, you could survive, but you're not really thriving. So the question is like, you know, what kind of, benefit could humanity have by just introducing weed as part of the food source?
Mm-hmm.
If you think of cultures that have done this actually historically, you ever go to Jamaica?
Yeah.
You ever see that like 105-year-old Jamaican dude chopping wood and he's built like an ox? Like the dude is, you know, that dude's been eating weed his whole life. You know, let me assure you of that. So, you know, it's really for me kind of like shifting the narrative on cannabis as a proactive nutrient, as an essential nutrient, like the new vitamin C, is kind of some of the storytelling that I'm into right now.
Write that book, baby. And so this fusion of food and cannabis obviously is very like deeply rooted in your viewpoint, the importance of this plant. But how does that tie into your experience with Bong Appetit, Vice's show?
We didn't know. We didn't know what we were doing on Bong Appetit.
And how did you? I read about how you got this opportunity, but how did that come to be for those listening?
So it was 2014, 2015. I was judging Cannabis Cups. I met a dude named Abdullah Saeed at the Cannabis Cup. He was a judge also. And he lived in Williamsburg and I lived in Williamsburg and we were smoking a joint of sour diesel. And he's like, man, I'd love some of that. And I was like, here's my number, you know, and kind of like, Abdullah and I became friends. So I had a connection to some of the people in the Vice universe. Also, New York was crafting its legislation and I was like going up to Albany. So I had a film crew follow me up, a different crew from Daily Vice that went up and we did a story on the legislation side of it. And then I was hosting like these underground dinners called Dinner is Dope with my friend Hawaii Mike. And
oh my gosh, with Hawaii Mike?
You know Hawaii Mike?
Yeah.
So
cool.
Aloha. So yeah, Mike was doing these dinners and I had a space and we kind of teamed up on a few of them and invited some of the guys from Vice to dinner. And through that experience, Bong Appetit actually existed before my time. It was a web series prior that had done like a bunch of episodes on the web. And when Vice took over History Channel and created Viceland, it was H2, it was there. Now there was a cable network and they were looking for different properties that they had to bring onto television. So in Williamsburg, I'm well known for the food thing. I have a restaurant called Feta Sao. It's a barbecue spot. I'm account 420 at Peter Luger's, you know what I mean? Like, all my vegan friends out there are just cringing right now, right? But between food and weed and Brooklyn, like, I was kind of a known entity. And they asked me to come in to do Bong Appetit. At first they were like, yeah, here's $500 a show for a weed budget. We just need like an ounce and make some butter. And I was like, no. I was like, you guys are like in charge of like telling the bleeding edge. Like, this is Vice. This isn't like, like something else. We need to tell the story of cannabis chemistry. We need to like, create like, this narrative. At that time, it was about like from seed to sale. That was like the big word. I was like, I want to look at the weed from flower to fraction. I want to be able to take the plant and I want to be able to break it down into all these different textures of hash. And I want to be able to take that oil and break it down into all these different compounds and create this pantry where like, and we weren't working with like, weed chefs. If you were out there trying to be a weed chef, then this wasn't for you, or it wasn't for us. We wanted to work with like master chefs and iron chefs and, like real, like, culinary artists that had never been able to use cannabis in their palette of ingredients. And that's, I think, what really made the show so successful was the fact that it was that discovery. It was that, like, imagine Picasso getting a new palette of paint, to paint with. And we didn't do that. Like, we didn't go into this, like, real talk. Vice was like, all right, we're going to do a show. We start production next week. You have no budget. Like, so we had to pull this shit off in record time. And the show basically evolved into what it was, quite naturally and organically. And, my role as the cannabis producer, all the weed stuff that you saw throughout the show, there was me behind the scenes. But Abdullah as our host, and Rai as the on-camera cannabis expert, and Vanessa as our culinary expert, and all of the different chefs that we brought in, and the cast and crew. I mean, like, I was like a spoke in a wheel. And I have to give credit to the entire team, because it really was, it took a village to pull that off.
Yeah. I mean, a show is a lot of moving parts, especially one that is on TV. But nevertheless, you have the first cannabis producer credit.
I know. I learned
IMDb.
about IMDb while I was on set, and I was like, and that was there was some negotiation, because they wanted to bring me in as a consultant. And I was like, no, I'm a producer, and then they gave me the cannabis producer credit, which had not been done before. So, yeah, I think that's been used a few different times since. There's been a bunch of different weed content and shows. And I think that's really, you mentioned authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important that in anything that you do, that you be authentic, but especially when you're trying to shift perspective. Having subject matter expertise and being able to really talk to the core community and get buy-in and acceptance from the people that know, and how that, kind of trickles down to like a more mainstream audience. Those are really like, key ingredients in that kind of success.
Yeah. And I think one thing that is so inspiring about you, if I might say, you certainly emanate authenticity. You're like a very unique character, even down to the way that you dress and just the way that you embody yourself. And you have created opportunities for yourself out of nothing. Like, you kind of have invented things that didn't formerly exist. Is this intentional on your end? Is this just a byproduct of, like, your parents raised you right? Like, what's your outlook on self?
So in my 30s, I thought I knew everything. When I turned 40, I realized I know nothing. A lot of the self-discovery happened through another Pinsky triangle of sorts, one that I refer to as the Pinsky triangle of trust.
Oh, okay.
And this was patience and fortitude are at the anchors, and then embracing change is at the apex. And this is a good one. Fiorello LaGuardia, you've heard of him. He was the mayor in New York during the Great Depression. There's an airport named after him. He also commissioned the first report after cannabis prohibition in New York State with the New York Academy of Medicine to show that cannabis was actually medicinal in the face of adversity while it was being made, demonized by Anslinger and the whole, Hearst movement. And during the Great Depression at the New York Public Library, if you've ever been to New York, there are 2 lions that are on the stairs of the public library that flank the library. And LaGuardia renamed them to Patience and Fortitude during the Great Depression. And it was a symbol to the people of this great city of New York that we will get through this, And, this was a big time of self-discovery for me, because I was leaving New York and I was getting out of my first marriage, and we were splitting up and getting divorced. My ex-wife and I were both 2 fierce Leos.
You were the lions.
Yeah. And trust, I realized, was at the foundation of every relationship, of every experience. It starts with some sort of like, trust relationship. It could be at a stop sign where you trust that the guy to your right is going to let you go. It could be in a work environment with a friend that you're, or a partner in life. But when trust gets eroded, and when you lose trust in a relationship, it's really hard to repair. It takes forever to build and then can be lost in an instant. And, what I really started to realize was that the triangle of trust, you may think of it pointing outward, like I trust you. But really, at the end of the day, the triangle points inward. It's trust of yourself. And going through that experience of getting off opiates after 14 years a slave and getting divorced, moving out to California, working on Bong Appetit and having a platform to like shift perspective globally. It really was introspective for me in terms of like, the knowledge and the learning. And then, especially coming out West and being alone relatively, I was very buried in my work and in my career and in the movement and the learning. And I realized that like knowledge is over here and experience is over here, and knowledge wins every time. And remember, I was in my 30s and I thought I knew everything, and I realized I know nothing. And then all of a sudden I became on this quest for knowledge. And sometimes, if not all the time, the most knowledge comes from the most challenging experiences. You could think of me like being in the same relationship since I was 16, married for 20 years and with my ex for 30 years, and having a 9-year-old son that I had left behind in New York. This was the most challenging experience, but it bred the most opportunity for knowledge. And as I started to realize that like I can do it, there were things that like, failure is really like something that you learn to embrace. Failure breeds knowledge in the best way. So it was like, okay, well, this didn't go exactly as planned, but what did I learn from it? And now I'm learning about, this new whole plant medicine movement. And believe me, man, being a New Yorker and moving to Venice Beach and like running into the sacred geometry guy and like,
I want to get to that.
you know what I'm saying? Like those were all things that were very introspective in terms of like the last 6 years of me being out in California and really honing in on educating myself on things that I didn't know about.
Feels like you like don't stop writing your story.
None of us do.
It kind of gets deeper and deeper. And I'm wondering how psychedelics do, since you brought this up, play a part in the further unraveling of self and knowledge.
I think that the cannabis movement really carved the path for the broader plant medicine movement.
Right, of course.
For me, being out in Cali and having access to the cannabis chemistry community also got me like deep access to the psychedelic chemistry community. And I started to really learn more about different compounds that exist in plants, but that also are naturally produced by our body. So cannabis is one, right? We create anandamide and we have THC that's in the plant. But then I started to get into DMT.
DMT, yeah. I knew you love those three little words.
And it was the first time I did DMT was in the 90s, and it was like at a Fish show for New Year's, and like, it was a different experience. But
out with people, like around humans?
Well, we were actually in the camping area, and it was like, around a campfire and whatnot. But eventually I did do DMT in the audience at a rock show, like seated.
You're too brave.
I would say this. Best musical experience I've ever had. ever. Like, hands down. I've eaten mushrooms at shows. I've done, ecstasy at shows. I've candy flipped. I've done a ton of LSD. The DMT experience at a music show in a safe set and setting, okay, with good people around you and whatever. But like being able to like blast off into a parallel universe with the same things that are going on around you, but just in a totally different perspective. It's not for the faint at heart. I would only suggest it if you're a psychonaut. But if you haven't hit the DMT vape pen 3 times at a fish show outdoors at Jones Beach like I did last summer.
But here we have this intersection of tech and psychedelics or plant medicine again. Like technology is enabling us to experience these medicines in new, way more accessible ways, way more like intense or concentrated ways.
Yeah, I mean, it used to take like, a lifetime. Like, think about how people used to migrate like from across the country in horse and buggy, and you'd have like kids while you were on like this journey over 15 years to make it from New York to the West Coast. And like we do it now in like 4.5 hours because of the technology advancement of airplanes. You think of ayahuasca, and I have not sat down in an actual ceremony, right? I haven't done my introduction to the same compounds was with the advance of technology and in a vape pen, which made it more accessible. And also, I'm really curious about psychedelics that have a shorter duration, so
why?
Because I'm going to be 50 and I'm busy and like, I don't want to like, I don't have the time to like, oh, cool, I'm going to take the weekend off and LSD is a commitment.
Oh my God.
And especially
you always forget, like at the 11th hour, you're like, oh, it's going to keep going.
Yeah. So especially at heroic doses. So for me to be able to like tap in for 20 minutes and have a transformative psychedelic experience, and then kind of come back. And it's the same with ketamine. Ketamine also is like, you're back within an hour, so
you can be back to driving, like no problem.
Maybe not driving.
Okay.
But the point is that like, ketamine's different because it's not like it exists in your body naturally. Right. But we've got the same compounds that are in DMT exist in our body. So those are the ones, entheogenic compounds that exist in nature that also exist within our body. Those are my like curiosity most.
Any particularly, I know that you said that you did a DMT, smack the pen at a Fish concert, but what experiences are you having? Are you meeting other entities? Are you hopping dimensions? And what are you looking to gain? Or
so first of all, I have no expectation. So I'm not necessarily looking to gain anything. Second of all, it's few and far between. Like, even though it's accessible in a vape pen, like the last time I did DMT was, we're in December now, and it was in July.
I mean, these experiences are sacred.
Yeah.
Like you have to have reverence.
Yeah. So like, and scary.
Yeah.
Okay. The first time when we were around this campfire, right? Like, yeah, they spoke to me. Like they were like, yo, what are you doing here? How'd you get here? And it scared the shit out of me. Like the first time I smoked DMT compared to the second time, it was maybe 10 years because it was that like, but over time, what happens is, it's like visiting your lake home. You know what I'm saying? It's like your vacation place. So like, as you get more comfortable, you can tap in, and all of a sudden, and after the third hit, like the first hit, you kind of feel like you're like, oh, things are kind of changing. The second hit, and hold it in as long as you can, the bubble of reality starts to kind of like make itself clear. And with the third hit, you just pop and you just pierce the veil of reality. And for me, I really like to keep my eyes open. I want to see how this 3D construct that we're like, this holographic projection, right, that comes from our mind, how is it shifted? And these plant medicines help us, right, to do that. The way that we observe light, color, sound, all of those things get altered. So like you're still sitting in the same environment, but the textures of everything that you're on could be totally different, or the way that like people's voices or like audible things sound totally different. And for me, if you're asking like, what am I looking for?
Mm-hmm.
I'm really curious to see how I could have a different perspective on reality. And we're going to start to see that, Apple is going to be
VR meets psychedelics.
Yeah, like Apple just dropped virtual reality or augmented reality. You know what Apple's new product is just going to be called?
Mm-mm.
Reality.
Oh, thought it was a joke.
No, but that's literally like that's the concept of what reality will be is evolving.
Mm-hmm.
For me, a lot of these ketamine clinics or a lot of these mushroom practitioners, encourage you to, come to a safe place and put a blindfold on and put some good music on and have a very inward experience. And I'm like, fuck that. I want to see the surroundings and the environment around me. And granted, if you're in a room and there's nothing going on and you're just tripping out on some really cool wallpaper, then that's one thing. But if you're at a experience like a fish show, where it's like your favorite music and a light show and like the people around you and everyone's like on pogo sticks, it looks like, you know what I mean? Like those are the types of experiences for me that I think are most transformative when, because the DMT or the psilocybin or the LSD, like these are all catalysts. It's not the drug really. It's doing something to yourself. You're the one that's actually like having this like, perception shift. These catalysts and compounds are just kind of activating you to be able to see this. And it didn't always have to happen through drugs. Look at the yogis and look at the Buddhist monks that use meditation and breathing. And just through that same repetitive breath, what you're doing is you're basically changing your vibration. You're changing the frequency, that you kind of like receive and transmit. And yeah, it's like changing the channel. It's like we're all watching like, Fox News or whatnot. The media is like that. Even the good media is like that.
No, I understand the analogy.
So it's like, so now it's like, now you're watching Nickelodeon, and everything is kind of like, in a different kind of like perspective. I
really love that outlook. And I don't think I've ever heard anyone be so candid about the, yes, there's such value to the inward experience and the introspection and getting to know yourself and the excavating. Yes. But we do that so frequently. What does it look like to go for the literal and to alter the reality around you, to embrace different perspectives that have been given to you because of these plant medicines, and to have a greater appreciation for your surroundings when you're no longer imbued by these chemicals because you've had experiences of like, okay, about 12 hours ago, that plant wall was moving.
Yeah.
It might not be now, but I'll never forget that wall was breathing. And that is something that a real memory that you've created that you get to hold on to. And of course, also, like your external reality is a reflection of your internal reality.
Big time.
So to have that acknowledgement and relationship with both, I think is actually not something I've like fully, I don't know if I've like dived that deep into that.
That's what I'm saying.
Path.
Keep your eyes open.
What?
Keep your eyes open.
On a DMT journey, I did once.
Yeah.
I had a friend tell me, I was in Yosemite looking at the most beautiful mountain, and I was like, my eyes are closed. I'm like drunk off. Where am I? And he was like, open your eyes.
Yeah.
And when I did, I saw the most Dr. Seuss looking visual of my life, and this beautiful symphony of voices saying, enjoy the show.
Yeah.
We're putting this on for you.
Yeah.
And if you can take that idea and apply that to everyday waking life. What a beautiful way to live.
What a fun way to live. I did have a time where I was, this is the danger of putting DMT in a vape cart, is the accessibility.
Yeah.
And, you want to, thinking of it in less of in a ceremonial way, but more of like with respect.
Right.
Like this is a serious compound that like being, like I said, make sure that you've had several experiences in private, in safety, that you know that that you could step into, this parallel universe in public. You know what I'm saying?
Well, I think that's like the psychonaut badge.
Yeah.
In some ways, is like, I have traversed these lands. I have gone to the edge of the universe and back, and now I'm gonna rip this pen at a Fish concert.
Yeah, like I was on OxyContin for 15 years, man, and I survived that.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So, like, when you do anything in life that whether it's losing weight or whether it's getting off of a drug dependence, each thing that you thought that you couldn't do, that then you do. These are the things that build the self-confidence. The triangle of trust points inward, and it comes through adversity, and it comes through, having challenging experiences that breed the most knowledge.
I hope you have, we got to get you a big triangle necklace or pendant or something.
Yeah, some sort of
something's in the works.
Yeah, something like that.
Well, I couldn't appreciate learning about you more and learning about the way that you think, because it's set my brain in a few different directions that it wasn't moving in prior to our conversation.
Good.
But one thing to further set this in for everyone listening.
Yeah.
Last question.
Sure.
For you. And we've dabbled in this a bit already, but what is the tangible that you could give to those listening thing that has opened or changed your mind? Is it like a literal book title or song or trip or?
Well, there have been a few. Most notably, I would say that there's a book. It's by Manly P. Hall.
I heard you talk about this on Set and Setting.
It's called The Secret Teachings of All Ages.
Yes.
And it is, it's really interesting. I actually was, kind of gravity pulled me into the spiritual bookshop. I was just walking past it, and all of a sudden I found myself like being pulled in. And I used to use this book when people would come into my studio, and I would say, hey, open up to any page and see which page kind of speaks to you.
Love a book like that.
And this one's got like, you could look it up. It's got all these different ancient texts and different things that, span from sacred geometry to religion to just all sorts of different esoteric stuff. And this is the thing with me and my book collection, because I'm not a reader. I've read a few World of Warcraft fiction books in my time, but I have an amazing library of books that I haven't read.
We're all guilty of that, by the way.
None of them. I'm like, oh yeah, that one looks good. So this one is amongst the collection. But what I started to realize, and it wasn't just in this book, I would come up with all these postulates and just to kind of bring you full triangle, right? I came up with this narrative of the Pinsky triangle. It was 4-point geometry, it was music, food, weed, and tech. And in the 90s, I was connecting the dots on music and weed. And then I started to connect the dots on, then I added food. Bong Appetit really went full triangle and connected. Music shifted, right? Kind of fractaled off into media, and content. Weed fractaled off into plant medicine. Food fractaled off into health and wellness. Tech fractaled off into everything
the
related.
Future of all.
The future. But Bong Appetit was the first time where I connected 3 dots. And then when I came out to California, one thing we didn't talk about, but I spent a couple of years as the chief cannabis evangelist at Eaze.
Yes.
right? And Eaze here was really at its core was a tech company. And when I was in Cali in 2017, 2018, and I was doing literally all 4 points, I had a tech lane and, I was connected the dots. That's when really the triangle went fractal. And when I was having this conversation innocently out to dinner, a lady at the table next to me knew who I was. And she's like, have you ever Googled triangle and fractal? And because it was just part of my narrative about how I'd connected the dots. And that's when things went like kind of fractal. And that's when I discovered that a fractal triangle is called a Sierpinski triangle.
You can't write this shit.
So this is the thing where it's like, I would have these like, things that would happen in my life. And then through discovery, I would discover that they already existed. Like, there's this theory that like we're born like, all knowing, and our lifetime is about remembering everything that we already know. So that's kind of like, just to bring it full triangle, is a lot of these books and a lot of these different texts and experiences, like, what's been most transformative in my life, to answer your question, is discovering that all this stuff that I'm learning on my own actually has existed before and for a long time before me.
Call that confirmation.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Probably a couple of hits that you're on the right path, my friend.
Perhaps.
Thank you. Thanks for existing. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you for looking sharp in a turtleneck. And could you tell everyone where we can find you on the World Wide Web and as well about upcoming projects?
I'm Jason Pinsky on all social media.
Ooh.
And stay tuned for my next gig. It's called Pinsky and The Brain. Actually, I'm most excited for our episode where I have you on as the brain. But yeah, we're doing a series where I like to bring in people that are thought leaders and, influential in many different ways. And, on this quest for knowledge, what better way to bring in a different brain every week and learn something new?
Love it.
So stay tuned for that. And yeah, you can find me at Jason Pinsky on all social. Aloha.
Yay!
Cool.
Thank you.
Cool. That was fun.
Wow, that was so beautiful.
What a journey.